Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Europe podcast. Good morning. It's Wednesday, the 21st of January. I'm Stephen Carroll in London. Coming up today, I doubt it. The US President Donald Trump rejects the idea that his Greenland threats will torpedo the US-EU trade deal. Air Force One is forced to turn around as an electrical issue delays the start of Trump's Davos trip. Plus, Wall Street suffers its worst session since April's Liberation Day meltdown as the Sell America trade crushes US stocks. Let's start with a roundup of our top stories. The US President Donald Trump has dismissed threats of retaliation from the European Union over his desire for control of Greenland. Over the weekend, Trump announced tariffs on goods from 8 European countries unless he secured a deal to purchase the Arctic territory. When asked whether those levies could trigger the EU to break US investment pledges, here's what the president responded.
I doubt it. Look, they need that agreement very badly with us. They really do. They fought very hard to get it. So I doubt that. But we'll see what happens. We have a lot of meetings scheduled on Greenland.
Trump was also asked how far he was willing to go to secure Greenland. His response, quote, "You'll find out." The US president's move to strong-arm Europe into a Greenland deal is likely to dominate his appearance at the World Economic Forum in Davos later. In his address to the event, the French President Emmanuel Macron accused Trump of trying to subordinate the EU.
Without collective governance, cooperation gives way to relentless competition. Competition from the United States of America through trade agreements that undermine our export interests, demand maximum concessions, and openly aim to weaken and subordinate Europe.
Macron spoke after Trump threatened France with a 200% tariff on its wines if Macron didn't join his so-called Board of Peace for Gaza. Meanwhile, Greenland's Prime Minister has said the Arctic island's population and authorities need to start preparing for a possible military invasion, even if it remains an unlikely scenario. Now, President Trump's arrival in Switzerland has been delayed after Air Force One was forced to turn back shortly after its departure. The White House says the plane had encountered a minor electrical issue. It returned to Joint Base Andrews in Maryland, where Trump boarded a backup plane, which has departed in the past few hours. He had been expected to arrive in Zurich at 5 a.m. local time to speak in Davos at 2:30 p.m. The complication ultimately delaying his travel to the forum in Switzerland by more than 2 hours. Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney says countries have a choice: band together or be on the menu. At Davos, the former central banker called time on the international rules-based order.
We know the old order is not coming back. We shouldn't mourn it. Nostalgia is not a strategy. But we believe that from the fracture, we can build something bigger, better, stronger, more just. This is the task of the middle powers. The countries that have the most to lose from a world of fortresses and the most to gain from genuine cooperation.
Carney's speech received a standing ovation at the World Economic Forum and was echoed in comments to Bloomberg by the former British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. While Carney didn't directly mention President Trump by name, he took aim at the US president's pressure tactics and defended Greenland. Canada is overwhelmingly reliant on trade with the United States, but last week signed a trade deal with China. Markets are showing signs of stabilizing today after tensions over Greenland and a rout in Japanese bonds triggered a broad sell-off on Tuesday. The S&P 500 fell by more than 2%, erasing its gains for the year so far as it logged its worst day since October. And based on one measure tracking US stocks, treasuries, corporate bonds and Bitcoin, Tuesday marked the worst session since April's tariff-induced sell-off. Bob Michele is JPMorgan Asset Management's global head of fixed income.
I think this is a message from market participants to the administration. We can only go so far, and they've got to figure out where the line is. I think what Besson forgot to include was, the market had a fit in April, and then they backed off of a lot of things, and then calm ensued.
Now, Bob Michele was speaking to Bloomberg after the Danish pension fund, Akademiker Pension, which has about $100 million in US Treasury, says it's planning to sell its holdings by the end of the month. However, the CEO of UBS, Sergio Ermotti, has warned that Europeans could be taking a big risk.
Diversifying away from America is impossible. I think that in any major asset allocation, one could probably think about having an overweight or underweight, but diversifying away from the US and also from the dollar is a quite dangerous bet.
So Diarmati was speaking as a worsening crisis over Greenland drove gold and platinum to fresh records, with silver also near its all-time peak. And tensions between Elon Musk and Ryanair CEO Michael O'Leary have spilled into a second week. Now the world's richest man is considering buying the Irish airline. Bloomberg's Tiwa Adebayo has more.
It's an unlikely crossover. One builds rockets, the other sells €9 flights in an entirely different orbit. But it seems Michael O'Leary and Elon Musk are on a collision course. The online feud reached new altitudes after O'Leary claimed he wouldn't install the Tesla CEO's Starlink technology on his fleet of planes last week. Since then, the two leaders have exchanged insults on X, culminating in a poll posted to Musk's account on Monday, asking followers if he should buy Ryanair. The prospect spooked investors on both sides. Ryanair sales declined in Dublin trading, while shares in Tesla also closed lower. And any Musk takeover would require him to work around current EU regulations, which require European airlines to be majority-owned and controlled by EU nationals. In London, Tiwa Adebayo, Bloomberg Radio.
And those are your top stories on the markets. The MSCI Asia Pacific Index 0.7% lower. Eurostoxx 50 futures are down by 0.1%, although some signs of a recovery on the way on Wall Street. S&P E-minis up by 0.3 after yesterday's sell-off. We are watching Japanese bonds this morning. Yields are coming down after yesterday's dramatic sell-off. Not a full recovery, but the 30-year yield is 14 basis points lower, and the 40-year yield is down 17 basis points this morning. In a moment, we'll bring you more on what to expect from Donald Trump's Davos appearance, plus the latest on the markets after yesterday's sell-off. But another story that we've been reading this morning: put your suit back on. The rush towards dressing down at work is over. That's the warning from Bloomberg opinion columnist Andrea Felstead, who's been looking at the evidence from catwalks, social media, retailers and sales, and which shows that we are wearing more sophisticated clothing and shoes again. In the US, the clamour for women's loafers, for example, mean their median prices have risen by 40%. Men are moving to wider leg trousers and more relaxed jackets. Marks and Spencer's, though, has seen a 15% jump in suit sales. So is this something that tells us more about our working habits? Well, firstly, we're going back to the office more, but also the labour market is getting tighter. So Andrea writes that we want to not only show up, but smarten up as well. Now, she writes that some of this is seasonal, but the items that stand out, including the return of blazers, have seen a spike in mentions by social media influencers as well. As Andrea puts it, we're past peak slob. There's more dressing up to be done. You'll find the piece at bloomberg.com/opinion. We'll put a link to it in our podcast show notes. Now, the US president is expected in Davos today, despite the issues with his plane on the journey. He'll be arriving to an event full of business and political leaders who want to know how far he'll go in his latest campaign against European countries over Greenland. Our Chief Europe correspondent Oliver Crook is back with us this morning for the latest on this story. Oliver, we talked to you yesterday about this as well, but we're counting down now to Donald Trump's appearance in Davos. What sort of reception is he likely to get, given what we heard from Emmanuel Macron and from Ursula von der Leyen there yesterday?
Yeah, I mean, I think he really loves to build the tension ahead of these kinds of meetings within Europe, and of course doing so in part by sharing personal text messages from both Mark Rutte, the Secretary General of NATO, before he set off to Europe, and also Emmanuel Macron, which gave, some insight into sort of the European approach to dealing with Donald Trump. But just to sort of recap what we heard from Ursula von der Leyen yesterday, saying that basically a deal is a deal with the United States, and that the Europeans will respond in kind if these tariffs do go to an effect on February the 1st. We heard something similar from Emmanuel Macron, who's saying that basically, the United States, is basically a neo sort of colonial power at this point, putting pressure on Europeans to become vassals of American power. And again, once again, strongly advocating the use of that very strong European trade instrument, the anti-coercion instrument, which he sort of brought up again at Davos yesterday. But as ever, I think that the sort of approach for the European leaders when it comes to Donald Trump is to not be excessively overly confrontational. You do see a different tone being adopted by these leaders in this issue of Greenland, a much stronger tone. But again, I think the ambition for everybody in the room that will be trying to get in front of Donald Trump and try to have these conversations will be to try to find a diplomatic throughway, try to sort of talk down the situation and try to find a way to sort of cut through all the very powerful rhetoric we've been hearing over the last couple of days. So I think that's going to be the approach. Of course, Macron in that text message also suggested arranging a G7 meeting in Paris on Thursday after the sort of meetings in Davos. So we'll see if that sort of cuts through it all. I would say that if Emmanuel Macron wanted to cut through in his speech, it seems the way that he managed to do so the best was with those massive reflective aviators he was wearing, because that is what I woke up to from everybody from the United States were the images of Emmanuel Macron speaking at Davos.
Yeah, indeed. And of course, he'd explained in a speech earlier this week, which was the context a lot of people were missing, that he had an eye infection, which is why he was wearing the sunglasses.
It adds to sort of the surrealness of all of this conversation we're having about Greenland to see these images of Emmanuel Macron. It's just very interesting.
Yeah, it's quite stark, isn't it? Now, the president seemed sure before he left that the EU wasn't going to retaliate about this, but thinking and looking ahead to the meeting of European leaders as well, how certain does it look now that the EU won't choose to take the more dramatic option?
I think that at this point they have to take some sort of draw the line in the sand somewhere. I think it's interesting. We've been hearing a lot from the Trump team, whether it was Scott Bessent yesterday speaking in Davos, basically, again, sort of doing the thing that he does quite a bit, which is, I think the Europeans interpret as a bit of gaslighting, which is basically, why is everyone so hysterical and crazy about these tariff threats? Everybody just relax. It'll be fine. The only reason it was fine last time was because A, the United States backed down on certain measures, but B, everybody else except for China and a couple others basically rolled over and conceded to what the United States wanted. We also heard from Howard Lutnick writing in the pages of the Financial Times saying there's going to be a sort of reasonable outcome to all of this. We don't need to worry about this too much. But I think for the Europeans, the question is not whether or not to retaliate, but is the nature of that retaliation. This is a debate that we had in the office yesterday when we were talking about is it about inflicting the maximum damage onto the United States through targeting tech companies and that sort of thing, which would obviously escalate things substantially, or for the Europeans, is it more just about drawing a line in the sand, not appeasing the Trump administration, saying that there is a limit to where we can go, but not trying to amplify and make things too much worse? Again, Ursula von der Leyen says that there would be an unflinching response, but again, a proportional response. So I think that the calibration of that response is really what's going to be the focus for the European leaders.
Okay, Oliver Crook, our Chief Europe correspondent, thank you. Stay with us. More from Bloomberg Daybreak Europe coming up after this. The Trump's tariff threats over Greenland rattled markets too. The volatility does seem to be easing today. Japanese government bonds are also rebounding after yesterday's dramatic sell-off there. Garfield Reynolds, who leads our Markets Live team in Asia, joins us now for more. Garfield, in terms of the broad market sentiment, what is the picture today after the big sell-off yesterday?
Well, I think today the markets are very much waiting to see whether there will be that easing down in the tone of things between Donald Trump on the one hand and Europe on the other. Maybe at least some investors were heartened by Trump in amongst everything else that he was saying that he didn't think that the trip would go badly and he didn't think that the European trade deal would be in trouble. So that, by his standards, may be seen as somewhat conciliatory, or at least open to the idea that Europe will be somewhat conciliatory. So that's allowed investors to at least hold off on things. We've seen Japanese government bond yields come down. The only thing that's really been moving to underscore that there remains plenty of nervousness is the huge surge in gold today. Yes, that's got something to do with Poland saying it's going to go on buying gold. But that was mostly known in a lot of ways. It's just the scope of it. So that elevated level for gold is a reminder that markets are still on edge. They're just not so on edge as they were yesterday.
And thinking about Japan then, a massive sell-off in government bonds there yesterday. The finance minister appealing for calm. Are markets listening?
It's hard. It's a little bit too early to tell, really. Yes, bond yields have come down. In some ways, they've come down almost too rapidly. The 40-year yield was down at one stage by about 20 basis points. That's after it jumped 32 basis points yesterday. So that's a lot of volatility, which in general speaks to plenty of ongoing unease. After all, the sort of investors who buy and want to hold longer end Japanese government bonds don't want to see them jumping around either way by 20 basis points or more in a single day. So there's going to go on being some unease, and I think that's going to linger through at least until we have a 40-year auction that's coming up next week in Japan. That's going to be another day that will be being marked in the calendars for not just Tokyo traders, but for the rest of the world, because the issue of how high Japanese government bond yields can go and how rapidly is going to haunt global markets for most of this year, really.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.